Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this Fusion 21 webinar, Building a Safer Future, the Building Safety Bill. This webinar has been put together in response to you, our members, telling us how important, the importance you place on this subject. And we all know that you're already starting, planning and working together to implement the changes that are expected as a result of the bill, and before that, the work of Hackett and so on. My name's Andrew Gray. I'm the Member Relationships Manager at Fusion21, and I'm delighted to be able to chair this morning's panel. Just gone one too far. If you're not familiar with this webinar software, and I'm sure by now you all are, but if you want to see more of the screen, you can click the orange arrow and that will reduce the size of the panel. If you're having any difficulties in hearing us, then again, you can adjust the audio settings, but sometimes if you're still having difficulty, turning off and on tends to work better. And then finally, if you are, please do, we want this session to be as interactive as possible, and please do ask your questions using the question panel. We decided that we're going to take all the questions at the end, but please don't let that stop you putting your questions forward. And if by chance we don't get through all of the questions, the panel have agreed that we'll ask them to respond to those questions after the event. So in terms of just by way of a very short introduction, as I said, at Fusion, we have a comprehensive offer to our members which covers all aspects of building safety. This ranges from our consultants framework, our construction works, and of course our current compliance framework. But we also are in the process of developing a new building safety and compliance framework. And there is an opportunity for you, our members, to help to continue to shape that framework. And if you are interested in doing so, please do get in touch after the webinar. At Fusion, we also want to continue to add value to you, our members, and that's why we are putting these webinars together. And hopefully you will have attended one or two of these before, and we hope that the next hour or so will prove insightful, thought-provoking, and aims to give you some of the very latest thinking in the building safety arena. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to the panel and briefly introduce the panel. They are Mark Jones, Director and Head of Fire Safety at White Young Green; Howard Hall, Director, Head of Safety Management at White Young Green. Then we have Paul Mooney, who's Service Director of Asset Management at Salix Homes. And our final speaker is Darren Hartley, Chief Executive of TAROE Trust. So I'm going to hand over the presentations to Mark and Howard, and they will then hopefully now take you through their presentations. As I said, please do ask questions, and we'll deal with those at the end of each of the presentations. So over to you, Howard and Mark.
Morning, everyone. This initial presentation is just an introduction to the draft Building Safety Bill and its implication. Just by way of introduction, WYG, we're now part of Tetra. We got acquired last year. But our core services are within the building and the built environment. I'm just trying to click through. A bit about WYG, please, you'll read this at your leisure. But WYG is a global company with the inclusion of Tetra over 20,000 consultants. Our core business is dealing with the built environment, so it's new, it's refurb, and it's reconditioning, and across all sectors. Social housing has been and remains one of our key targets, and therefore we have a huge element of clients within that region already. So our experience and our comment is based on not just the legislation, but also what we believe is the impact for yourself as clients or recipients of the legislation that's been proposed. Fire safety is a key element, and the reason why we've pulled this forward initially is that the bill itself looks at the gateway and the different responsibilities and accountabilities are going to be introduced with the law, but fire safety is also being reviewed currently, and therefore it's essential that the developments within the fire safety legislation and the fire safety elements are also considered in tangent with the Building Safety Bill. With regards to the Building Safety Bill itself, the bill itself obviously is in a reaction, or is a reaction to the Grenfell disaster and Judith Hackett's report, and also the other reports and commissions that have occurred since then. So there's been a lot of information and a lot of committees and a lot of consultation occurring post the incident to look at how the legislation addresses the safety for high-rise residential, but also buildings as a whole. The bill itself the consultation bill is quite large. It's over 300 pages long. The guidance is over 150 pages long. And there's also other associated documents you can read as well. By all means, if you have the time and inclination, have a look at it, but this will provide an overview of what the bill is intending with the key actions. So the bill itself, it's been described as being the biggest overhaul of the building safety regime in the UK for the past 40 years. The main drive is going to be looking at the priority for the multi-occupied residential over 18 metres or 6-storey. Now, it must be remembered this is the initial priority group, or based on an impact assessment, but this bill will apply to all buildings. And therefore, whilst the concentration initially is going to be for multi-occupied, you do need to, as a landlord or as an owner of buildings or as a portfolio owner, you need to be aware that it will be applying retrospectively to all existing buildings. Obviously, the key focus is for the high-rise resi, and the impact assessment that's been undertaken suggests there's over 13,000 existing buildings in the UK that fall within this scope, and they anticipate there will be between 400 and 500 added to that number per year. So obviously this has got quite a large application, and the implication from cost is discussed later is actually can be quite severe. Now, as I said before, existing buildings will also be brought into the remit of this legislation should it be passed. But there will be what normally called a derogation period, so there will be a phased implementation for them. But if you're a housing stock, you also have other commercial or the retail or warehousing units, then they will at some point need to fall under it. Now, the extent to which the documentation is required will be proportionate to the risk for those buildings. This bill itself is in consultation, and there's an expectation it's implemented in 2021. Now, you have to provide the overlay that given COVID, given Brexit, parliamentary time, then if there's an expectation that it comes in 2021, but it will come in at some point. Behind the scenes, there's also all the UCAS accreditation, the CPD, the competency testing, and formats that are now being undertaken to ensure that there's sufficient diligence around the different roles and posts. Now, those timescales are for delivery in March 22. So again, the law will come in force. It may be amended slightly as part of the consultation process, but the key element and advice to everybody is that please don't ignore it. It has a severe impact on buildings, and especially for the high-rise resi, and therefore the preparedness of property owners, portfolio owners, and social housing providers is key at this moment, so you can address what may be CapEx or OpEx requirements. In addition to this building safety bill, it's not going to replace any of the existing legislation. So CDM, health and safety at work, the existing fire safety legislation still applies, building reg still applies. This will be an additional overlay to what is the existing UK statute and the duties and requirements. Sorry. So duty holders. So within the bill, they are going to identify duty holders. Now, for those people who have been used to the construction design regulations, CDM 2015, then they'll recognise that we've got client, principal designer, designer, principal contractor, and contractor as the identified roles. Within CDM, there are only the client, principal designer, and principal contractor, which are the nominated or formal roles. And therefore, the comment would be that there's an expectation that those existing roles will be enhanced with a greater responsibility for the fire structural safety within the design and the construction element of buildings. So rather than creating new roles, they are looking at the moment at the competencies of those existing roles and to see what level of additional experience or scope of responsibility is required to ensure that all buildings have the required structural and fire, M&E and safety elements inherent within the design, and then also that's transposed into the finished build. So it's safe for occupation, and then post-occupation, once the building is in use, is for any refurbishment or alteration to the building, that the same response to the safety information and the diligence around how the design work is planned and approved and the use of materials flows through. At the bottom of each slide, you'll see I've put some form of limited commentary. And this is really just what we believe to be the impact to yourselves and to the sector as a whole. So the comment would be that you've got to have, in a sense, an adequate or competent advisory consultancy support. I'm not here pushing ourselves or other consultants in the UK so much as we would advocate that any property owner, portfolio owner, looks at the level of in-house competence, but also looks at the level of any supply chain they have with regard to their competence and their demonstrable competence to make sure that they can reach what they can adhere to what may be the new competency requirements. These will flow through in the next 12 to 18 months as they're worked through by the different sections. Gateway certification is something in the next slide. This is where you will have a formal process, like a gateway process of ensuring that the design is correct and that the building is correct and suitable for occupation. Again, these are key elements and I'll discuss those in a few minutes. Design, structural safety and the resource core capability. There's also a question mark in the sector about the professional indemnity insurance and the insurance that's available in the marketplace for both supply chain but also for property owners. And again, you may anticipate an increase or a change to your insurance levels and cover based on these increased responsibilities. Sorry, there's a slight delay on transfer, so apologies. So, golden thread. Now, most of you may be aware of the phrase golden thread, and that's something that's come through from Judith Hackett's report on post-Grenfell. And this is a key sort of reference point where, in essence, Judith Hackett and the consultation process have identified that a building should have a golden thread of information, and that should be the vital building safety information that's stored to allow anybody to understand how the building is constructed, how it's operated to ensure the safety of all the occupants. So the vital safety information is part of the golden thread. Now the issue here is that currently for any large build, there is typically the requirement to use a BIM level 2 modelling as part of the design process. This is essentially where you use 3D modelling rather than the 2D plans to actually look at the model when you're designing a new build or you're designing an extension or refurbishment, and you are trying to understand the clash, the access, the egress, and any potential risks you have for the occupation, build, or use of the building. Now, BIM level 2 is quite easy to incorporate into new builds and new plans. It's quite expensive to actually apply retrospectively to existing buildings. So in the absence of BIM on an existing building, if the building you've acquired or you own doesn't have any BIM documentation associated with it, then we need to look at, or you need to look at, what level of safety information you have available as part of the health and safety file and the general operating file, the O&M, A&M documentation for the building, to ensure that it gives a valid and consistent approach to how safety is being maintained and monitored within the building, but also details of what the construction method and the construction materials are, such that any change in approval for construction materials can be judged. The other key role is accountable person. So, and this is when you get the building in occupation, there needs to be an accountable person and also a building safety manager appointed. Now, these are new roles. In a sense, they're new titles, but they're existing roles, which normally was the FM provider or the FM manager. But their responsibilities have been, will be increased to ensure the suitability of the building structure and safety. Now, these will be big increases in the level of responsibility and accountability those persons will hold. And therefore, there needs to be some thought at the moment about the suitability of existing post holders and also the suitability of your information, and therefore whether you need to make any revisions or additional support for those roles and the existing information. Commentary I've provided also looks at potential costs. If you're looking at existing planned or proposed developments, then adding BIM to it that hasn't been included in scope can have circa 10–15% cost on fees for the CDM support. If it's a large build, you may also have an information manager cost, but also the gateway certification is going to be a chargeable process, and therefore, whilst we don't have eyesight of any fees at the moment, there is likely to be a delayed process or the program, but also an additional fee. So again, the more information and preparedness you can have at this stage, the more you can anticipate what your OPEX and CAPEX will be for future, for existing, and for existing occupied buildings. Building safety case. The building safety case is the predominant underlying measure that is being used for the vital building safety information. This definition is taken from the Ministry of Housing and definition they came up with, and also this has been included in a lot of consultation documents and working party documents that are being used. And it states that it's a structured argument supported by a body of evidence that provides a compelling, comprehensive, evidence and valid case as to how the accountable person is proactively managing and controlling fire and structural risks. If we use that as your baseline for judging the level of suitability of your existing building documentation, then the key elements are you've got fire and structural risks. Now, the only reference point typically buildings have for that will be the health and safety file, which is produced when the building is either built initially or it's been refurbished or been altered in any manner under the Construction Design Management Reg CDM 2015. So in addition to that, you've got your PPM and all your planned maintenance and your routine maintenance and any reactive maintenance you have. So if you look at that definition, the suggestion is to start looking at whether your existing level of documentation for your buildings, with a priority for the initial over 18 meters, 6-story mixed residential builds, will satisfy that definition. Now, to help you, the law is obviously then requesting that they, or that if it's enacted, would be pushing this responsibility onto the accountable person, who is classed as the duty holder within when the building is occupied, but also for them to have an active watch over that safety case to ensure it reflects the current use of the building. Now, there may be some revision required to the level of support that your existing accountable person role needs to be able to have that level of information regarding fire and structural risk. So again, proactive review at the moment, baseline where you are at the moment, find out what gaps you have, and then you can start to assess what the impact of any additional resource or recruitment may need to be. So the golden thread and gateways. So within the typical design process, REBA stages, you often have gateways, which are key milestones that need to be, where certain actions need to be undertaken or deliverables need to be completed. And this idea of introducing gateways into legislation is quite new. It's not new for the industry. The two principal gateways that I think we need to look at will be Gateway 2, which is the end of the design phase, in other words, the end of REBA 4, which is prior to construction, where the design itself, which should be a final design at that stage, is judged or needs to be assessed as to whether it's suitable for ensuring the safety of the future occupation. And then Gateway 3, which is after the end of the construction, REBA 5 and 6, going on to 7 handover. That needs to assess that the actual building has been built in accordance with the design and there is no inherent risks or design elements that would create a risk or a hazard to the occupation of the building. Now, these two gateways are going to be enforced by a new regulator. There will be a formal assessment for these gateways and certification. There will be a cost, and there will also be a design, a delay element to any formal program. If you look at typical 18-month to 2-year build for a large high-rise resi, where you've got 6 to 12 months worth of design, then you will need to build in some form of additional time to your end of design period for Gateway 2. And then at the end of the construction period, you'd need to then put in an additional time allowance for the Gateway 3 certification. Now, if you have buildings in progress at the moment, those new buildings, it may be worthwhile looking at the Gateway 3 certification depending on how long your design and build phase are. So implications. So the golden thread, there needs to be the CDM, principal designer, principal contractor, needs to have a far greater level of cohesion in providing the information you need for your safety case. There's also the fire element, which is obviously taking far greater relevance and prevalence now based on the recommendations of post-Grenfell, but also the acceptance that the fire is the biggest single risk to a building, in a high-rise building. And then the building services element, the regulator is also looking at the approved materials. So there's a re-looking within the industry of what are approved materials for cladding, structure, and such like. So again, all those elements need to start coming together. So for existing buildings or projects, then there needs to just be a refocus on ensuring you're collating the right information to allow you to actually go for Gateway 2, 3 as and when that becomes applicable. That may be in 2 years' time, but it's not unreasonable to believe that certain large rise building projects or programs won't complete within that 2 years. So they may fall within the remit of this legislation. Existing buildings. Whilst the focus of this new bill is purely on the high-rise resi, because that's the initial impact assessment that's being made, it has to be remembered it applies to all existing buildings. And therefore, if you have an existing building that isn't high-rise, that is multi-occupied or is social housing or is resi, then there will be a point after a derogation period, in other words, a delay of implementation, where Gateway 3 certification will need to be applied for, and that will be the safety case report that you will need to create for the use of that continued use of that building. So again, we're advocating that there's a review undertaken over the next 12-18 months of your existing building for the level of certification, the level of documentation you currently have, so that you can actually be prepared for that Gateway 3 certification as and when it comes through. There may be OPEX, there may be CAPEX implications. So if you go on a 3 to 5 year rolling budget, then this needs to be start incorporating into that budget, because it will have a budgetary impact. Enforcement. There are true enforcement elements to this new bill, and anyone that is used to, or has not used to, beg your pardon, anybody that is aware of the Corporate Manslaughter Homicide Act when it came in, it introduced increased powers which related to publication orders and also to fines linked to turnover. Now, if they adopt a similar approach within this legislation, you are going to have real enforcement potential for breaches of the Act. Now, the HSE and the new regulator, which the HSE is becoming for this point of view, are clearly stating that it is going to be an advisory role for the initial implementation of this bill to ensure that the sector and the property owners have a chance to understand and implement the changes. However, it is really strongly recommended that it's not ignored. If it's ignored, there could be tangible effects on you as a business and as a corporate business based on the breaches or alleged breaches of this Act. In addition, you have to remember that there's the HSE fees for intervention. So where the HSE believe there's a breach of duty and start investigating a breach and prosecute, they're able to charge for £157, which is the current charge per hour for the activities they undertake, or those that they instruct to undertake for sample analysis and testing. So the key takeaway from the penalties aspect of this legislation is early engagement, early review, because the penalty of ignoring it could actually have serious sanctions on you as an operating business. Because if it's linked to the turnover, then obviously this could actually be detrimental to you as a business. So the fire safety bill itself. The fire safety bill, the regulatory reform is being reviewed at the moment as well. And therefore this needs to be viewed in conjunction with the building safety bill. You have the similar sort of adoption of a responsible person within the regulatory reform order at the moment, but also that their responsibility is to make suitable and sufficient assessment of risk in multi-occupied residential buildings of any height. Now, if we apply this to the priority of the over 6-storey, 18-metre residential buildings in the UK, which is the government assesses over 13,000 currently, then those powers are going to be increased to actually look at the structural integrity, the fire safety spread, and the fire safety integrity of the existing materials. So again, it's not only going to be the building safety, it's going to be the fire, it's going to be the fire brigade, it's going to be the building control. So there's very much a cohesive approach to ensuring that all the buildings that are deemed to be at high risk initially, then all buildings going forward actually have a safe environment for occupation and use. These next couple of slides are a digest really from what the current legal opinion is on the impact of this bill. Now, it has to be stated that all these comments are based on a consultation document and therefore are subject to change. But these are what the legal profession believe will be the main impacts. So the rise of BIN, and what they're expecting is that the BIN level 2 will become effectively the recommended standard for the golden thread for gateway approval. Now, most legislation doesn't specifically specify a particular software or delivery. They'll say but the guidance is likely to say that it will be BIM level 2 or equivalent. And the BIM level 2 is Revit models, it's 3D modeling, and therefore your current or existing capability to use or incorporate BIM level 2 really needs to be reviewed quite carefully, because the cost of actually applying it retrospectively for those that are in planned progression at the moment is very expensive, and also if you have, excuse me, if you have to apply it for existing buildings, that could be expensive. Active enforcement by the HSE, the legal profession, whether it recognises it as an opportunity or just as an impact comment, a cynical comment, but the reaction there is that they acknowledge that there is active enforcement potential by the HSE, and that in itself can be very complex. There's likely to be secondary legislation to clarify who is a responsible person when you've got multi-occupied use, different leasehold, different commercial, residential use within a building. But the reality there is that there will be a single person identified as the accountable person, the building safety manager, and therefore there will be a point source to which enforcement can be directed. As a client, you're always going to be responsible for ensuring appropriate delegation of duty and appointment, and if anyway. The last two slides, the increased cost. This is where we all take a big in-draw of breath at this point. So the government estimate that the current cost of compliance to the UK construction industry is likely to be £250,000 to £500,000 annually. For individual buildings, this could also mean £40,000 to £60,000 worth of cost just to adopt the BIM level 2, and then the increased admin and such like that goes with it. So there's a tangible cost to the sector and to the business and to your businesses with regard to the adoption of the required controls and increased level of documentation for this bill. Whilst there will be a derogation period, possibly a year, it's typically a derogation period on implementation. So you may have 2 years. You have 2 years in which to actually prepare yourself for adopting BIM, looking at whether BIM can be applied to high-risk, high-rise existing buildings, and also to low-rise residential, where you believe there could be a higher risk factor assessment, then you need to consider those as well. But these are tangible costs. Whether it's OPEX or CAPEX, doesn't matter, it's still coming off the bottom line. The only other comment was value engineering. Value engineering was put forward initially as a potential means of over-engineering existing buildings. This has been dismissed by Hackett right from the start on the basis that there needs to be an appropriate system of fire safety and structural integrity of the building and not over-engineering existing poor quality. This is why there's a plethora at the moment of recladding exercises where it's acknowledged that whilst there may have been approved products at the time of installation, it may not be deemed based on Grenfell and our current level of awareness is suitable for future use or continued use. That's the pocket version of the document. It has missed one slide, so I do apologise, and that was just talking about the regulator. That slide basically stated that as part of this bill, there will be a new regulator, and that will be based out of the HSE. So the HSE will be the building safety regulator, and they'll be responsible for enforcing this bill, but also for oversight of the building control function within local authorities and their improved inspectors. So again, there is going to be a formal regulatory body. Both the building control and the HSE are actively recruiting for addition to allow them to enforce and advise and ensure compliance with this bill. So in total, my comment to you would be is that it is something that will have a massive impact on your operational cost and your proposed new building costs. And therefore, please at this point start to review what level of documentation you have, what level of bid incorporation, what your competency supply chain may be, and try and assess what impact it may have. But within the next 2 years, this will become a reality for you. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions as and when later on.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Howard. I'm going to now quickly move on to Paul Mooney. Paul from Salix Homes. So hopefully, Paul, you can hear us and we'll be able to hear you, and over to you.
Thanks very much. Morning, everybody. I'm Paul Mooney. I'm from Salix Homes. Just a little bit about our organisation. We're based in Salford, in Greater Manchester. We've got about 8,000 properties. Some of them go into Trafford and also Bury, but predominantly we're based in Salford in Greater Manchester. And we have, of the 8,000 properties, we have 18 high-rise blocks, hence our need to get involved in the building safety regime, because it has big implications for ourselves. Just want to talk about what we're going to talk about today is early adopters. So, for example, I'm not sure how many people involved in the call are aware of the early adopter scheme, but this was the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government's response to the Hackett report back in 2018. They requested a series of organisations, some housing providers, some larger developers and contracting organisations to come together and work up some solutions to the areas posed by Hackett in terms of how we need to improve and get better to prevent another tragedy. So that's how the early adopter movement started. The idea is that a group of organisations that would adopt early safer practices to help us as a sector and industry improve the safety of buildings. In terms of Salix Homes' involvement, recently we've been consulting on the fire safety order, which Howard has just alluded to, as well as the building safety bill. As well as the consultation on both of those bills, if you like, we've been involved in policy design trials. And what that is where we, in effect, try out some of the solutions to the problems raised by Dame Judith Hackett. And as a result of that, we've tested safety cases, which is the basket of information that you will need to provide to the shadow regulator to, if you like, evidence that you're competent to run that building, and also the report that then details the argument of why that is. We've also been involved in mandatory occurrence trials, which is how you report issues of non-compliance directly to the regulator, and that will be a requirement in the new bill. We've worked with the Joint Regulatory Working Group, which is a group that involves MHCLG, it involves the HSE, the Home Office, and the Fire Service, the Fire Chief Councils, and Building Control, National Building Control agencies. And again, that is an organisation that has been set up to try and establish how the new regulator would work and, in effect, implement the new building safety regime. As Howard mentioned previously, the shadow regulator is based in the Health and Safety Executive, and they're now working up how that is going to work and coordinate responsibilities of all the agencies that are going to be involved in regulation of buildings in scope, and at the moment those are the ones over 80 metres. We've been testing risk prioritisation. That's how do you risk as an organisation or a building owner, how do you prioritise the risk of that building in relation to its safety. And we're also looking at major accident hazard assessments of buildings in scope. Again, it's to try and provide some evidence of what danger that building fits in relation to the building safety regime and how can you mitigate that risk safely. We've been involved as an organisation in the Build Back Better programme, and that's about a cultural change in our organisation. We can't underestimate the cultural change that is required to deliver the changes in the building safety regime and the building and the fire safety order. So it's about how your organisation is set now and where it needs to be in the 2 or 3 years' time. We've got the implementation process to kick in and the changes you need to make and how you're going to make them, because of significant changes that organisations, both in the construction but also in the housing sector will need to make. And we've also been working on the Building Safety Charter in terms of an assessment process and criteria, and I'll come on to that in a little while. And also the big thing, the whole reason why we're all involved in this process is to improve the residents' safety in buildings in scope. So what we have done at Salix Homes is we established a high-rise forum immediately after Grenfell. As I said, we've got 18 high-rise blocks, so we needed something in place pretty quickly that allowed residents to listen to us and to give their feedback to us, so that we can assure them through the process of us remediating some of their buildings, some of them which had failed ACMs, and we had to have a remediation programme in place. So we established the high-rise forum immediately. Since then, we've now developed a customer committee, and that's a formal structure similar to our board. We actually pay the customers that are on that committee, and they're going to be an influential part of how we provide strategic guidance to the organisation going forward. We're having customers at the centre of our communication strategy because it's important that customers are aware and have confidence in what we are doing. And obviously customers are very, very involved in the mandatory occurrence reporting trial. They have an opportunity to ensure that any issues of non-compliance can be reported to us as the building owner, and that we will action them. And obviously customers are involved in scrutiny, which probably you yourselves use quite a bit in your organisations. In terms of culture change, and again, this cannot be underestimated, we've just carried out a building safety review of our organisation in relation to what we would need to look like in the new building safety regime, how would we stack up against the new fire safety bill, and I think we're okay, but we're just okay, we need to improve. So what we've done is we've applied what we've learned, we've applied from our policy design trials with government and Home Office. We've got an idea of what's coming, so we're making sure our organisation is set for that whenever that is going to come, and we're probably talking 2 to 3 years. And it probably is a phased implementation of the bill in relation to new build and retrofit and the existing buildings. So it's important that we don't wait and we start to implement changes that we know are coming. We've got really good relationships with Salford City Council, with Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, who have worked with us to try and help us develop this risk prioritisation tool, for example. And we're working effectively with government and the HSE in the new role. We're one of the initial signatories of the Building Safety Charter, which I'll come to in a second. And we're doing this culture review of our organisation. So we've just done a blanket questionnaire to everybody in our organisation to gather an awareness of their understanding of building safety. And as a result of that, then we're going to start some awareness and training sessions to increase that. And we're doing something similar with our contracting partners as well. But we've introduced some new processes as well. So we've introduced new roles as the property safety officers who go out and do very specific building safety processes and procedures, checking fire doors, helping customers with making sure the smoke alarms are fitted correctly. So we've already introduced those, and they're starting to pay dividends as well. And we are planning to establish a building safety department within our organisation. Some of your organisations may already have that. We don't, but we're planning to introduce one. In terms of the early adopter group nationally, and as I mentioned earlier, there are some significant players in there. So as well as ourselves, other housing providers are Peabody and L&Q, based down in London. But there's also some big contractors, Kia and Wilmot Dixon. And we're all working with some local authority partners like Birmingham and Manchester to move this forward at pace. So the testing is now happening nationally on Gateway 1, 2 and 3, and that is early adopter partners, each playing a part in those testing processes. So testing Gateway 1 in terms of pre-design, some local authorities are working with early adopters to see how that might work right through Gateway 2 and 3. We have been involved in safety case policy design trials, and they continue to make sure that they are defined and that eventually something can be rolled out for the sector and the industry to understand what is required to provide that level of assurance to the new regulator. We're working with the HTC on the new regulator and how that might fit and what the requirement will be, particularly about, like Howard's alluded to, there's quite a lot of information in the bill regarding penalty and sanction. We're very much about how is the regulator going to help and collaborate and guide organisations through this process, so that we're all working in the same direction. We're working with the HTC on this major accident hazard identification, and then how would that be mitigated? So what would it look like? What would organisations need to do to ensure those risks are mitigated? And again, we're sort of working on pre-legislative building safety regime. What would that look like? What would the legislation look like? And how long do we think it would take for that to be implemented? Just a word on early adopter support of the Building Safety Charter. This is now out. There's an organisation that is set up to manage the Building Safety Charter. There's information there about the link if you've not already had a look at that. And this is part of the culture change. This is about organisations demonstrating in advance of legislation that they are up for the challenge, that they want to provide buildings that are safe to their customers. And it goes on to show examples of how you can do that. Best practice opportunities are on there, and there's some sort of scenarios and case studies for people to have a look at. So if you can go on there, sign up to it and demonstrate your commitment to building safety, that would be extremely useful. So the practical implications for us all going forward are the new roles, if you like, the accountable person and duty holder. They're new and they're coming, so we need to be understanding what that means. And that are new roles and responsibilities for everyone with complex buildings. At the moment, the building built is quite clear. It's buildings over 80 metres, but over time, no doubt that's going to go to more complex buildings, whether even they're below 80 metres. There will be new licensing regimes for the occupation of buildings in scope, so that is coming. It's important to understand what will be required to receive a licence and maintain a licence. We've talked, Howard talked about BIM. That is critical, a digital information system where we can collate, update and then share building information, not just with our organisation but with the regulator and customers. It's important that they can see the information as well. There's new skills required and competencies required in these new roles, but also the existing roles. So there's work going on about required to work in buildings in scope, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. Changes in procurement and planning for new buildings. I think it's clear buildings are going to take longer to plan, longer to construct, and procurement will need to change to make sure quality is much more evident than potentially it is at the moment. Similar for retrofit programs, they will take a lot longer to plan and probably cost more money. And this is going to take a lot of people, a lot more time, both in the short, medium, but also long term. All that has to be factored, costed, and put into business plans in terms of the financial implications. And there needs to be a more strategic approach, I think, to complex buildings and ownership across the sector to make sure that, you know, we're aware that buildings in scope are going to be more complex, both in terms of design, management, and people that live in there. And we need to reflect that in how they're managed. Been asked to touch a little bit on the building safety manager. So obviously this is a new role. It's appointed by the accountable person and has to be competent. And at the moment, the BSI is working up an accreditation for this role, so they will have an accreditation requirement that demonstrates the competency. And that will be a registered post that has to be then approved by the competent person, but also through the regulator. So it's a significant new role that is seen as one of the key turning points of making our buildings safe and making sure residents have an accountable person to whom they can report issues. Again, we need to employ all those insured in maintenance management activities of buildings in scope, have sufficient knowledge and experience. And again, that will require a competence as well, a level of competence, and it will mean probably for the first time that a lot of people involved in repairs and maintenance activities, for example, a joiner that served his time and his or her time, got the relevant qualifications of sitting guilds 20 or 30 years ago, and never did any CPD since then. That's going to have to change. There will be a requirement for people to receive a competence check and accreditation to work on buildings in scope, and then there will be a requirement for CPD after that to ensure that that competence is maintained. Operating safety case regimes and risk assessment and mitigation is a massive new issue that is going to come in to how you manage buildings. It's important to recognise this just isn't about fire, it's also about building structure, and the structural integrity of buildings is just as important and needs to be included, as is the resident engagement strategy. I'm pretty sure the noise has been loud enough for everybody in the sector to hear that one of the big issues coming out of Grenfell is the lack of engagement from customers and residents, and that has to change, and it is seen in the bill that it needs to change, and that has to be recorded and measured appropriately. And as is with the liaison with residents and their contractors, so there's going to be new duties on residents as well, particularly around how they maintain their residency, how they manage the buildings themselves, and about if they're doing work to their properties, how that is reflected in terms of the safety regime in the building, and how the building safety manager is informed of those operations. Just a couple of documents here I want to draw your attention to. There's a document from the Construction Industry Council called Setting the Bar, which is a very good document following on an earlier piece of work they did 18 months ago called Raising the Bar, and that's about levels of competencies required for anybody that's going to be working on high-rise or high-risk buildings in the future. If you've not seen that, you need to, because it basically spells out the competency that's going to be required in the future. It's a really, really good document to use as a starting point for reviewing your own either in-house teams or your own staff, or what you would expect contractors to be able to demonstrate to you. And similarly, the BSI Flex 8670 is where the BSI is now working on competencies for the principal designer, principal contractor, and the building safety manager. And there will be accredited posts that will be required and demonstrated and will be required by the accountable person to ensure that they're in effect employing competent people to design, work on and manage their buildings. And again, the thing we can't underestimate in all of this is the required safety culture change. There's clear responsibilities about promoting safety across the board, and we've all got a part to play in there. The new building safety regulator will forge mature relationships with the industry and duty holders and encourage them to take responsibility. So it's important that we recognise the building safety will have a regulatory role in terms of sanctions and penalties where that's required, but they've also got a massive role to play in helping us, helping the sector to comply with the new regime as it comes in. And it's important that we ourselves ensure we support the sector and industry in raising the bar in competence. That's the only way we're going to get better at doing the things that are required in the bill. And just the final point from me is one of the reasons I think Salix was asked to take part in the early adopters back in 2018 was because we'd started the journey already. There's no reason for people to wait. You've got the fire safety bill, you've got the building safety bill in draft, you've got other documentation raising the bar that's helping us understand what's going to come. Don't wait, we need to get on and start making those changes now. And with that, I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Thanks very much for that, Paul. That was really insightful, and clearly, again, the message in all of this is don't wait. And I think the other clear message that you've sent forward to that is how important is the role of resident engagement. And so delighted to hand over to Darren from TAROE Trust for your presentation. So over to you, Darren.
Thank you, Andrew. Just about good morning, everybody. My name is Darren Hartley. I'm Chief Executive of the tenant charity TAROE Trust. And firstly, a big thanks to Fusion21 for inviting me along today and giving me the opportunity to speak to you in relation to the implications of the Building Safety Bill on resident engagement requirements. Hopefully this works. Slight delay on the slide, so hopefully I can account for that as we move forward. Okay, what I intend to talk about today is the impact of the draft building fire safety bill on residents. So I'm not going to be talking more broadly about the fire safety order. I'm also not going to go in to some of the implications which we've heard already, particularly from Howard, on the scope and technical side of the new legislation. In particular, what I'd like to highlight is some of the new requirements around resident engagement strategies. And a key theme that I'll be highlighting is around the importance, as we've just heard from Paul, on culture change and giving value to the input of residents as part of this process, influencing and really shaping the decisions, because ultimately at the end of the day this is about their homes, their safety and their lives. Whilst we've heard also that the scope is in relation to what the Act refers to as higher risk buildings, and which is currently proposed as 18 metres, that's only what's at the proposal stage, so there is potential for that to change through the process. And there is also potential for it to change in terms of post implementation of the bill once it becomes an act. There are possibilities that we know that some of the safety issues presented can be of kind of multi-occupancy, but maybe specialist multi-storey buildings, which perhaps fall below the threshold, but which can sometimes present additional safety risks. I guess the point there is that a lot of what's contained in the bill is kind of basic structure and outline, but there's a lot of things that are going to develop afterwards in secondary legislation. And we're seeing this increasingly with legislation nowadays, that the secondary legislation is going to kind of put meat on the bones. The implications for that for residents is that things are going to be live, that there'll be developments over time. So it's not just a matter of engaging with residents on a single occasion. This is about an ongoing dialogue with residents. So these are just some of the implications that we'll go through as I talk in a little bit more detail about the framework. Hopefully the slide's going to change.
I'll move it forward for you.
Okay. I guess when we're looking at this from the resident's perspective, what we're really talking about is the use of legislation in order to be able to increase trust and confidence of residents in the scheme. What we're hoping to achieve is, from the perspective of residents feeling safer as well as being safer within the higher risk buildings. So culture's key, trust and confidence is key, and communications is also key. And I'd like to think of it a little bit as what we're seeing here is the use of legislation to change approaches and thinking about ways of working, which historically might not have been conducive to building safety. A little bit like where we saw legislation brought in about drink driving or seatbelt wearing, which we now consider have a very different view today about the acceptability of that compared to when such legislation was brought in. This is a whole new regime, and it introduces a whole new level of complexity. So that's going to make it even more difficult for residents to navigate. And again, that emphasises the importance of effective communications, on being able to explain who is responsible for what within the system and what options that residents have in order to be able to navigate their way through the system. As one example, whilst the registered provider might be the landlord, that isn't always the case that they might be the accountable person. And that's certainly the case where we've seen complex multi-use buildings where, for instance, the RP has taken a wing of a larger block. It may be that they're also a landlord to the ultimate accountable person within the block. And that's going to be a difficult thing in itself to explain to residents. When we're talking about residents, the relevant persons is the terminology which is used within the Building Safety Bill, and that is slightly wider than what you might have traditionally thought of as tenants or tenants leaseholders. It extends to any residents within a block over 16, so it could be who supported housing or who are occupying on a license basis. So just a kind of key point, yes, we heard from Howard's going to be a new regulator. That regulator's activities are going to be informed by residents. So at a national level, there'll be a residents panel who will shape some of the secondary legislation and regulations that are issued over time. And also there's going to be responsibilities around publishing. So what it demonstrates is that at every stage and at every level of the system, there's going to be accountability built into it to residents on a more general basis. And again, that's all about increasing the trust and confidence. I guess the key message on the duty holder control system is that there are going to be requirements at every stage of this process. So it's a kind of a whole systems approach. And what that means is that there'll be an element within the engagement strategies that you're looking at about actually providing confidence about the competencies of the individuals who are involved in the system, about the materials that are used and the safety of those materials, and about the redress that might be available to residents should they have concerns on an ongoing basis. I guess where this leads to is the fact that there's going to be a lot more information that's going to kind of go almost as a kind of passport of the building that's going to go alongside as part of the life cycle of the building. Residents are going to know that that's in place, and they're going to have rights to be able to seek access to that information, much more so than that they've ever done before. So yeah, key requirements, I've listed a number of obligations there around the accountable person, but the key point really there is that the accountable person is going to be obliged within the legislation in order to ensure that a residents engagement strategy is prepared and issued. Now, many registered providers may say, oh, well, you know, we've always operated a residents engagement strategy. It's something which is part of our DNA. I guess the key point here is that this is very different to what might have gone before, in that we're not talking about an organisational approach. The residents engagement strategies are going to need to be bespoke and building specific, because they're going to need to take into account the characteristics, both the physical characteristics of the buildings, and also the characteristics of the individuals who live within the schemes and their particular needs, and the manner and way in which they'll be engaged throughout the process and maintaining the safety of buildings. The bill does already include quite an extensive list of prescribed information which they already expect and which can be added to over time in terms of the level of information that is actually given to residents. So a little bit more detail about resident engagement strategies. They'll need to be given, so you're going to have to think about how they're actually physically made available to all residents within the buildings, and what aspects of decisions they're going to be consulted on, the arrangements that are going to be in place for getting views to take them into account, but also for them to, on an ongoing basis, to be able to access information and for that information to be updated regularly. So we are seeing some organisations which are developing things like apps, but of course that's not going to manage to get to everybody. Hyde, for instance, I know developing an app for residents to be able to access, but it's also about the timing of that information. If it's just a sign up, there's an awful lot of information that's provided. So you need to think about when and at what intervals some of this information is made available. There is going to be things which are going to need to be placed on display in a prominent location, and not obvious piece which is highlighted is the building assurance certificate within that. Paul touched on the building safety manager and the competencies that's and the BSI work that's going to be developed on this. I guess one of the big challenges that's going to come is that each individual building is going to need to name a specific person as the building safety manager, and effectively their role is to carry out and ensure that the responsibilities placed on the accountable person are implemented. But that is going to involve, for instance, operating the complaint system. There's going to be a draw on that person's time. It's almost a kind of the Superman type role that they're going to have to take on, because they're going to have to operate the complaint system. They're going to need to ensure that all the technical obligations are met, but then there's also the customer engagement side. So it raises questions about the skills of that particular role. I know a number of organisations say, well, this is going to be about a team-based approach, but that needs to still be married with the fact that there'll be a one named individual for individual buildings. Alongside all of the obligations that are going to apply to the accountable person, for instance, there are obligations that are clearly articulated within the bill which will be placed on residents as well. Most of these are very sensible things which you would expect. The kinds of things are that they must cooperate, for instance, with the building safety manager. They're going to need to give access to the homes in order to be able to provide information for the safety case report. So there's all the additional challenges which registered providers often already have with access arrangements to buildings. But residents themselves are going to be responsible for maintaining what's described in the bill somewhat unhelpfully as relevant resident items. I guess what they're meaning by that is anything which is within the flat which the resident is responsible for maintaining, and where the responsibilities for that maintenance doesn't fall on somebody else, for instance, such as the landlord. This raises a whole host of questions that are around things like white goods, which I'll return to in a few moments. So, I've touched on already the issues around culture are going to be critical. And what I'd say is that whilst the scope is about just is high risk buildings, and that's kind of defined as 80 meters or 6 stories at the moment, there's potential that could extend. There is going to be this phased process, and the impact assessment suggests it could be as long as 10 years before the full scope of the buildings come within the Act. I guess what our message would be that you don't have to wait for you to come in, and actually many, even if you've got buildings that are still kind of multi-occupancy buildings but which fall below the threshold, it would certainly be good practice to be taking on a number of the requirements that strictly apply within the scope of the Act, well, when it becomes an Act. I think there's a question there about kind of tenancy management issues, culture and approaches. Obviously, there's a lot of sanctions and responsibilities that are backed up that are going to need to be met, but at the same time, I guess I would caution about taking a too aggressive policing line on enforcement type approaches, and that some of the softer approaches, which again I'll just come on to in a moment, might be more effective in being able to get the required reach and levels of compliance. I guess one of the areas which was influential in the Hackett report was the approach in Scotland, where the regulatory system already had requirements for you to have engagement strategies north of the border. And whilst that was on an organisational basis, it's kind of useful to be aware of. It comes back to that point that they're using legislation in order to change culture. I mentioned about the value of kind of softer approaches, but actually where there has been very active resident engagement, and I've listed some examples there, led reaction group, for instance, what we've seen is that it's enabled organisation, kind of groups of tenants to come together behind a common cause, and they were very influential in terms of some of the other work at Tower Blocks UK and Fix My Block. And I know that the residents themselves had even gone so far as to be involved in developing some powerful films about the concerns that they had in the area and the steps which they wanted to see implemented in order to be able to address that. And certainly the tenants that come together on Fix My Block have actually worked on a really helpful toolkit for residents on how to seek redress if they have concerns about their buildings. And I've listed some organisations there that have already been doing quite a lot of extensive consultation around the development of the building safety resident engagement strategy. And I think the next stage that is that they're going to need to hone that on to building specific basis. Just building on the message there about more creative approaches in order to get better reach. I've listed a number of organisations there that have very much been taking a kind of more creative approach to using social media. So Tamar had Safety Saturdays, and that's managed to get quite a number of people engaged and switched on to the importance of safety within the blocks. Ultimately, the residents are the eyes on the ground. They've got obvious vested interest in ensuring the safety of the building. Some organisations have actually been involved in training tenants so that they can undertake risk assessments themselves. That doesn't absolve the landlord of responsibility, but actually highlight to increased greater levels of awareness. And we've seen in Hull there where block champions have been doing just that as well, on an individual block basis, to kind of take control of the safety of the buildings for their own homes. I mentioned earlier about the issue about appliances in the homes, and I guess I raised the question about what kind of support might landlords consider in order for offering things like pat testing within individual buildings, operating registers for appliances. And again, I've listed some registers at the bottom of the slide there, which are in place, which some landlords have been involved in managing, so that they've got an opportunity for the kind of early warning systems about dangerous appliances within individual blocks or in individual residents' homes. I guess the question there is that if you find that there are some faulty appliances, what might you do about that? And I know some landlords now are considering whether hardship funds to actually assist with replacement of safe goods in order to make sure that individuals can still get by with their day-to-day imperatives and can access appliances which they might not otherwise be able to afford. So I guess ultimately the key question is that what we're talking about here is that engagement strategies, change of culture, making sure you get your communications right. So we can assist with that. So we'd welcome both, if you want to get in touch with us for any assistance and support, or any case studies which we could showcase, we'd really welcome you getting in touch with us over that as well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Darren, and thank you to all of our panel. I hope you agree with me. There's some really interesting and, as I said at the beginning, insightful presentations. We've had lots of questions, which is great. That's the good news. The bad news is clearly we're sort of running out of time, as I suspected we would, in terms of our ability then to be able to answer them. So what I'm going to do is, to some extent, I'm going to ask a sort of combination, a number of questions that we had, but I'll also then ask the panel to try and be as short as possible. But one of the things clearly that's come out of the presentations and also as the questions is around sort of culture change within organisations, and how what happened, the tragedy that happened at Grenfell, has been a big kick in terms of the whole industry about how they adopt this whole principle of building safety. So the question I sort of want to ask the panel is, what do you see as the biggest challenges around changing the culture, both within, if you like, if Howard, if you take it in relation to the sort of your consultants, what consultants need to do. Perhaps, Paul, you could address it in terms of organisationally around boards and committees and what you see as some of the challenges around there. And then perhaps, Darren, if you could address it in relation to that sort of the resident culture change that's required. So Howard, do you want to sort of kick off around that sort of the whole big thing around how are we going to change culture within the industry?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because at the moment, CDM 15, when it first came in, and the idea of principal designer, the principal designer is the key role here that is involved in the building safety bill. We saw a big hike in the marketplace in salary expectations and such like, an availability of competent resource. So part of the issue for Fusion21 to the members is making sure their supply chain is competent, and really making sure that the competence extends into the enhanced roles that the safety bill is asking the PD to perform. A PD normally wouldn't have any BIM awareness. We've had to retrain our CDM consultants into BIM awareness and BIM knowledge. And it's not just knowing that BIM exists, it's also using the Revit model tools and all the software so you can annotate and then also use them. BIM is a really useful model whereby it allows you to put design risks or clashes or concerns onto a live 3D model that can then be annotated and mitigated by the contractor. So it's a really useful tool, but if you're not careful, if you just ask a bland question, have you got BIM capability, you also need to ask, have you got the software or the ability to amend Revit using Revit models, the software, and also the capability of doing it, and really ask for the experience of the use of BIM, because BIM's only really being used laterally over central government and large buildings, anything with a capex normally of over 50 million. So it's not custom and practice for it to be used. Generally, I think it's just a case of looking at your supply chain and ensuring that if you haven't got one, you've got a supply chain forum. The key element here that's coming through is that all of the supply chain involved in either new build, refurbishment, alteration, FM needs to actually be talking together, such you've got a single forum for the accountable person, the building safety manager, to reference and also use as a point of inquiry from the residents as well. And I think, to me, one would be supply chain competence and also forums being set up to allow a collegiate approach, but also an accountability.
Okay, that's great. Paul?
Certainly for us, it has to be like any culture change in organisation, needs to be led from the top. So we have greater involvement through early adopters and what we've been doing, involved in board. They've been regularly updated on the work we're doing and the implications for our organisation, the wider sector. But we've had to start with an awareness of what our organisation's comprehension is of building safety. So we've done this piece of work to try and understand that. And then we're going to put some awareness sessions in around, but it will be very much about, so when you've got a joiner going and doing a responsive repair on a blocking scope, for example, we want them to have a wider view than just going and fixing that piece of equipment or that door, making sure while they're in there, they're having a quick look round to see if there's any smoke detectors or is the fire doors shutting. It's just raising the awareness that when people walk onto a building, it's not just to go and do that. The housing officers go and do the tenancy visit. While you're there, you're using a lift, you're using corridors. It's raising the awareness that everybody's got a part to play in this, and everyone's got a really big role to play in making sure the buildings are safe. So at the very early stages, it's just about that sort of awareness and making sure that's right across your organisation, and that you're also checking your contractors have got that same awareness too, which is probably going to be extremely difficult.
And just as a quick supplementary before I sort of come on to Darren, have you, as a sort of organisation, and again you talked about the board, have you started to change the way that you report building safety matters to the board? Again, around sort of, if I were one of your board members, I'd be wanting to ask the question, Paul, can you confirm that this building is safe? And again, how do you sort of address those sort of questions?
We do. We've got a compliance dashboard that we are actually unique to us, but we certainly, and that goes to every board report, every board cycle. So that's a compliance dashboard, not just about building safety, but all the compliance KPIs that we expect around gas, electric, and all the rest of it. But it does include building safety as well. But the more interested in our strategic approach, what are we going to do with a future look to the bill, implications of the bill, and then what's it likely to cost? Because the costs have to be within the business plan. So all of that. So our board, we're probably fortunate because of our position as an early adopter. They're well aware of what the implications are and challenge us as officers about what we're doing to make sure we comply.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Darren. From the sort of biggest challenges around sort of culture change as far as resident engagement is concerned, what would you say they were?
Yeah, in some respects, I think I probably replicate some of the things that Paul was saying there, and ultimately it comes down to values. It's values from the top of the organisation as a top-down approach and at every layer of the organisation, but it's also values which kind of goes back up as well. So I think there needs to be a commitment to transparency, about genuine involvement, so that it's not just tokenistic, so that the input is shaping and influencing actual decision making. We saw, for instance, Camden very early on made the assumption of open access to all information available. And I think where Paul was just saying there about input back up to the board, there's obviously the quantitative measures about, are the buildings safer, are the compliance with the various range of things. I guess I just add the question there about, is the feedback that you're getting on a qualitative basis from residents that saying, do they feel safer in their buildings? Are there issues there around that? So I think if we're talking about culture, it's a much broader and holistic approach than just about kind of command and control compliance with legislation. It's about a broader approach which takes on board different people's sensitivities, issues, challenges, and vulnerabilities.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to squeeze one sort of final question in, and again, if the panel can be brief, sort of one-word answers. Again, we know that it's still a bill. We know that the legislation won't come, and we know that there are a number of bills in scope. But I think it is Dame Hackett who said, you know, she isn't expecting the industry to wait. And again, I think in Paul's, that was one of the things that came out of in Paul's comment. So what would be the one single thing that you would advise our listeners in terms of that, taking forward that don't wait message? You know, what are the things that they should be doing immediately rather than waiting for the bill? I'll perhaps go in reverse order this time. So Darren, I'll start with you.
Okay, be brief. So you should already, I mean, the effective organisations that value engagement with residents are already doing this, but they should be having detailed, meaningful dialogue with residents about what it is that they want to be prepared to provide that open access to information, and they should be designing their policies, their approach in a way which is directly informed by those discussions with residents, so that they're at the heart of everything that they do. Okay, thanks. Howard?
I think the key thing there is have an honest review of what documentation you currently have and the processes for the qualifying what you have. If you're not careful, there's a lot of historical information you hold on buildings that may actually not be relevant, and ensuring that the current sort of documentation relates to how the building's being used, and then you can understand what the gaps are and put a priority plan in place.
Excellent, thanks. And then finally, Paul.
I think Darren's point was really good. That's probably one it would be a top priority. Next is culture change. Understand your organisation's appetite for culture change towards the requirements in the bill, and also your supply chain, your contractors, everybody else that works with you, making sure they're aware of it and they're aware of the changes that are coming.
Okay, that's brilliant. So thank you all for those comments, and thank you to you, the audience, for listening this afternoon. We didn't get through half, well, not even, we didn't really touch on the question. So as I said at the beginning, we will ask the panel if they can look at some of your individual questions, and we'll do that and circulate them afterwards. We will also be making copies of the presentations available. We'll put them on our website because emailing them with file sizes and all the rest of it can sometimes prove a bit of a challenge, but we will put the presentation so you can access them. Again, if you need any help and support in terms of how you are developing your approach to building safety, please do get in touch. From a Fusion21 perspective, as I said at the beginning, we have a lot to offer around the whole issue of building safety. As far as webinars are concerned, you don't have to wait too long. We've got another one coming up. This is back to our series on the road to zero carbon, where we'll be looking specifically at electric vehicle charging, which again is becoming a really important issue. So finally, on behalf of me, I want to thank you, the audience, for being with us today. We've had great numbers, and also a final thank you to the panel, your presentations and contributions. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and as ever, stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks.
Bye now.
Thank you.